and we're carefully brainwashed. My country, right or wrong? Okay. Instead of my country, when wrong, should be set right.
An action by 4 women in Alviso in 1966 brought the U.S. use of napalm in Vietnam to the attention of the media and inspired a song by Pete Seeger. They were to become known as the NAPALM Ladies. But we're getting ahead of the story.
First used in World War II. It was used in the bombing of the firebombing of Dresden. In 2 appalling days in March of 1945, on consecutive days, about 1,800 tons of the stuff was dropped on the city of Tokyo, asphyxiating and incinerating 140,000 people. And then another 59 Japanese cities got the same treatment. In Vietnam, over the course of the years, not 1,800 tons, but 600,000 tons of napalm was dropped on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. At that time, dropping napalm on civilians was against international law.
And the chemical was made by Dow, you know, and you bought something for the kitchen, cleansers, all sorts of products. It's very, very, you know, benign thing. And here they were making this stuff to burn children.
Trucks carrying napalm bombs could be seen traveling on Bay Area freeways.
The napalm was there in our own neighborhood. It was like, you know, the war was way off there. But here we could see these things going back and forth. And a number of us spent a lot of time talking about what is your personal responsibility, what could you possibly do that might make other people more anti-war, whatever. And we were always searching for this. We experimented with different kinds of leaflets. We were in front of the draft board every single Thursday at noontime passing out literature. And we were very creative. We had Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's messages in March, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, we always thought that we could go work for Hallmark when the war was finally over. And it was an interesting experience. So being anti-war and trying to educate people to also be anti-war was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. And we were constantly trying to seek out what were ways that we could be even more dramatic. And in all the pictures of demonstrations, you would have some long-haired kid who hadn't washed for 3 weeks dragging the American flag on the floor. And we wanted to present a very different image. We were not that kind of person. And so we decided to attempt to stop bombs, literally, and we were dressed as ladies. And it worked. We were called by the San Jose Mercury NAPALM Ladies. It was very interesting. We wore heels. I wore my pearls, a gloves, whatever. We were ladies. Other people realized what we were doing, and they pitched in, and they got other people to help, and so forth. And a woman named Emma Stern, who, she at the age of 80 helped block the Oakland induction center and spent, I think, 30 days in jail planting daffodils, because when they asked her what kind of work she wanted to do, she said, well, I love to garden. Anyway, she called me up and she said, look, there's this woman, Lisa Kalvelage, who has this fantastic story, and she wants to be with you. So come meet her and talk about it and whatever. And so Lisa then joined the crew. And we did our discussions in the San Jose Peace Center. Aileen had a very different background than I. She was raised as a Catholic and a very moral kind of upbringing, and she had been active in Women's Strike for Peace until she moved to San Jose, and there was no Women's Strike for Peace. There was WILPF and the Peace Center. And so she joined WILPF and became very active in WILPF. Beverly, I just knew from WILPF. How she got to San Jose, I have no idea, whatever. But Beverly actually wrote the story up, and it appeared in a Women's Strike for Peace bulletin or newsletter. Beverly also sent the account to Pete Seeger.
On May 24th, 1966, the four women informed the media and set out to block a napalm shipment at the loading terminal.
The FBI report confirms this. They knew that this was going to happen. And the trucks would stop sort of around the corner, and the driver would come out with his papers and go into the office. And then he'd go out and they would drive the truck away. We don't even know where the truck was driven. And but we got tremendous TV coverage. So they had all the signs, they had us dressed up and whatever. It was a great deal of publicity, okay? But so we had to come back the next day, okay? But when we came back the next day, the very first truck driver said, you realize as long as you're here, there'll be no trucks. So meantime, other people had discovered this loading zone in Alviso, where they were storing these bombs, which then would be put on barges and taken off to Redwood City. Redwood City. And then they were trucked again to Port Chicago. And they said, hey, the bombs are there. So we went there, the four of us. We knew that eventually, if we really stopped things, somebody would try to stop us, which would be an arrest. And so our mental preparation before we did this was, at least Beverly, Aileen, and myself, we made arrangements to go to jail for 6 weeks if we had to. We knew that that probably wouldn't happen, but it could happen. And so if we were going to be sensible at all, we had to think that it could happen. And I did make arrangements, and of course my husband gave permission, and somebody who lived close by, who was a WILPF member, and I trusted her with my kids, okay? That if we had to do that, we would do that. Other people were very worried about, we will get run over with the trucks. I never really believed that the trucks would run us over. I really didn't. Maybe if I did think that, I wouldn't have done it. I don't know. Much later, when we're on our way to this loading yard, or storage yard, Aileen is running up this hill, okay? We're all carrying the signs, we're in heels, and when I later asked her, why did you go so fast? She said, I was so relieved not to have to stop a truck. I had to quit and get there. So it was a dusty place at the end of the bay. Alviso no longer exists, but that was the town of Alviso then. And there were all these bombs just stacked up all over the place as far as you could see. And a man on a bulldozer was, it's not a bulldozer, lifts up a forklift, okay, used a forklift, and he was putting these bombs on a barge. And we stood in front of him in the barge and told him not to do it. We thought what he was doing was immoral. He went off and called his boss, the man who had the permit to store the bombs, and the cops. And the cops showed up, a man named Pat Chu, who was the highest police officer in Alviso. He supposedly was drinking coffee at some bar. He possibly was drinking something a little stronger than coffee. But he was wonderful. He stood between us and the forklift. And Lisa went to put herself down. I don't know whether she thought she was going to lie down or she was going to kneel in front of the forklift. And he pushed her out of the way and stood between her and the forklift. There was no question. And he screamed at this guy, get off immediately. That guy was so angry that the police were not on his side. He said, he used some swear word, I can't even remember it. He said, but I'm going to go get my dog. And he went off. He went off. So about 45 minutes later, the person who had the permit to store the bombs had arrived. He begged us to leave because the sheriff's deputies had now arrived, and they explained to him he had to charge us if he wanted us arrested. They weren't going to arrest us. As far as they were concerned, we were just standing there. He would have to charge us. He started begging us to leave. Just go, please. Just, go away. We'll forget everything. No, we've come to stop these bombs. And he said, well, how can I face my wife having had you arrested? And then, of course, well, how do you face your wife, you know, where you do this horrible thing every single day? Then the deputies started making signs that they were going to arrest us. And I happened to be the first one that one of the deputies asked me my name, and I told my name. He asked me where he lived. I told him where I lived, and then he asked me my age. And I said, I'm not going to tell you. And he looked at me funny. I said, it's not because I'm being coy. I just believe that I don't have to tell you that. I believe that I only have to identify myself, and that's all I'm doing. At which point he turned to Aileen, and Aileen has a much more militant background than I. She said, I don't think I have to tell you my name. And so she and I started arguing over whether she has to tell her name or not. And it was just laughable. And then she turned to the sheriff's deputy and she said, do I have to tell my name? And he said, I don't know. So then that was the end of it. But when we finally ended up in the arresting booking room at the Elmwood jail, and it's very, very tiny, and they all put their guns into a gun locker because it's so tiny they're afraid of scuffles. The guy turned around with his clipboard. Now, Mrs. McLean, how old are you? So he could start his paperwork. And they finished the paper. And they finally said, look, you're really under arrest. And they promised to take good care of our signs. They took our signs away, whatever.
What were some of the signs?
My sign was, would napalm convert you to democracy? Beverly's, I think, was, I don't want to be a killer.
And then there was a very interesting 3-day trial. They had expected to be charged with trespassing, and you know they'd pay the penalty, you know, do the fine, whatever. But the DA made an interesting mistake. He didn't charge them with trespassing. He charged them with interfering with lawful business. And he was copying a charge that was being used in San Francisco against civil rights demonstrators that were sitting in at the fancy automobile stores on Van Ness. When Francis Heisler heard that the charge was interfering with lawful business, he was jumping up and down with joy. You know, I've been waiting for this for years. And so they pled not guilty and went through a 3-day trial.
We had a Green Beret testify at the trial about the use of napalm and having seen its effect on people.
Heisler and Joyce's, the other lawyer for the 4 that had been enlisted at the time of arrest, Reed Searle, Reed and Francis Heisler in chambers argued before the judge that all of the, in addressing the issue of legality, it would be appropriate to introduce the Kellogg-Briand Pact from the 1920s, the Nuremberg judgments, and the rules on chemical warfare, that these should be introduced into the trial.
In the Kellogg-Briand Treaty of 1928, the U.S. renounced the use of war as an instrument of national policy. The Washington Treaty of 1922 outlawed use of gases and all analogous liquids. The 4th Nuremberg Principle states, the fact that a person acted pursuant to an order of his government or of a superior does not relieve him from responsibility under international law, provided a moral choice was, in fact, possible to him.
Lisa's testimony was the most dramatic, unquestionably, because she told about growing up in Nuremberg and how she thought that to charge an entire country with crimes was ridiculous. And yet people always asked her, what did you do during the war? And she'd say, I was just a teenager. And then she was asked, what did your parents do? And so she wanted never that her children would not be able to answer that her mother did nothing. And she wanted to marry Bernie and needed permission at that time for brides or husbands, you know, to go with the GIs back to the States. And so she was asked to write an essay on personal responsibility. And the guy failed the essay. He said it wasn't good enough, and she had to go back and rewrite it. So she used that as part of her testimony, which of course was very dramatic, okay? That I have tried, to learn my lesson of personal responsibility. And when Seeger wrote a letter to our children, it was all on the topic of personal responsibility. What is your responsibility toward such a crime and so forth? And that still is the question for all of us.
Port officials learn that napalm bombs are being stored at the facility.
He had it listed as he was storing a commodity. And during our trial, they kept discussing this, the storing of the commodity. Anyway, he lost his license or his permit. So in a sense, those bombs were really wiped out of that little transit place. They weren't out of Port Chicago or Redwood City, of course. Yes. I think we convinced some people to take a new look at this war. Tom Wicker says absolutely for him, okay? It had to set some question marks in my neighbors' heads, okay? I know it did. I would love to talk to them now. Hey, it's 40-some years later. I would like to talk to the people on the jury who quickly found us guilty, even though the judge, that's one of the things. The judge included arguments that the U.S. had signed a Kalvelage peace treaty, treaty against chemical warfare, and that those and the Nuremberg judgment protected us. I mean, that was an incredible thing for him to include to the jury. He was chastised by the state legislature for having done that, okay? But he did. But of course, the jury paid no attention, found us guilty. Douglas was so angry at the jury, he would not come to my sentencing. He had come every day to the trial, but he would not come to the sentencing. He was so angry at the jury. I had been on juries, and I was a little more forgiving. And later, some woman had every member of the jury come and be interviewed by her, okay? She was thinking of writing something about what happened on that jury. The guy who was the foreman of the jury was a high school teacher, a high school social studies teacher, and he, by chance, he knew a neighbor of mine, and the neighbor told me that he said he was so excited about being on this trial that he could, tell his class, and he was so disgusted with how people behaved on the jury. Their attitude was, well, they got all the publicity they wanted, and, let's get it over with. And of course, the question is, why didn't he hang the jury?
We're two people who, in good conscience, should have hung the jury. And on the other hand, if we had been acquitted, we would have had to go out and do it again. So it was just as well it was ending. And it was pretty obvious that this judge was not going to put us in jail.
Why culturally was protesting at this time such a shameful activity?
Because of what is true now, okay? America goes to war, the flags go up, the flags go up, the flags go up.
How could you possibly criticize your country at war? We don't question why are we at war, what makes that person or that country an enemy. We don't. We're kids, get your gun, we're at war.
But of course, we're supposed to be that way. We're manipulated that way. The people who make money off our war machine are still there. They're bigger than they ever were, as you know. And we're carefully brainwashed. My country, right or wrong? Okay. Instead of my country, when wrong, should be set right. Well, the publicity was greater than we ever anticipated. And we not only then got the Pete Seeger song at a big demonstration in Redwood City run by Stanford people. I was forced to talk to this man to tell him what we were doing. This was just a few days after the arrest. We had not a trial. And it turned out to be Tom Wicker. And we did not know. He wrote a column in the New York Times about this. And he cites meeting me as the beginning of him taking a different look about the war in Vietnam. Well, that was an incredible thing to do that. And
I spoke at the demonstration and urged everybody to go out and do this. And of course, what I was doing was really telling them to go out and break the law. And the sheriff of San Mateo County was so horrified and so excited about this that at every single news broadcast for the next 24 hours, he would quote me and then tell how awful it was. And my father loved it. He said, you know, you pushed a button there, and he helped us get even more publicity. Now, did everybody go out and stop napalm bombs after doing this? Of course not, okay. But I think we threw a big stone into the pool that would make ripples.
Did you hear of any other incidents of people stopping napalm bombs?
No, not that I can remember. Okay, though the demonstrations would get bigger and bigger and bigger. Whatever.
The weekly protests against the draft continue throughout the war. Anti-war, anti-draft picketers will carry a decorated Christmas tree to illustrate their demand of "Bring the boys home by Christmas." Special invitations to participate have been extended to the mayor and members of the San Jose City Council, who recently voted their support of a resolution demanding withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Indochina by December 1971.
We did street theater. I mean, I told you about going to the draft board every Thursday. I have to tell you a little more about that. It was such fun. The real sarcastic ones would come out, "Oh, Thursday again." And then every single time you could spot them. They were trailing behind their lunch companions. And they were trailing behind so they could talk to us without them knowing it. And they would say things, "Slip us money." They would give us money. And one guy said, don't be fooled. They talk about you all day long and talk about why you're here. You see, and you didn't know that, but that really kept us going, okay, kind of thing in a way. And we did street theater, okay, and I happened to be the general because I fit in this army uniform that somebody else's husband had, and I had a cigar, and I had a school teacher with her books, and a nurse with her outfit, and somebody carrying a baby on a chain, okay? And we paraded around downtown San Jose.
In January 1973, San Jose WILPF takes an extraordinary step. League disclaims any war crimes responsibility. The statement reads in part, "Whereas we may someday be called upon to prove that we have opposed the killing of innocent people and have taken a firm stand against it, be it hereby known that we, the undersigned, have tried and will continue to try to end this killing of the Vietnamese people, North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese alike. Let no man say, when I felt my country was wrong, I turned my back."
This song took on very special meanings for my audiences there. We'll see what meanings you get out of it. Well, I should say that Lisa Kalvelage and 3 friends put on their best clothes, high heels, nylons, white gloves, and went down to a place where napalm bombs were being loaded. Later on, a newspaper reporter at the jail asked her why, and she gave them this answer. "My name is Lisa Kalvelage. I was born in Nuremberg, and when the trials were held there 19 years ago, it seemed to me ridiculous to hold a nation all to blame for the horrors which the world did undergo. A short while later, I applied to be a GI bride, and an American consular official questioned me. He refused my exit permit, said my answers did not show I'd learned my lesson about responsibility. Thus suddenly I was forced to start thinking on this theme, and when later I was permitted to emigrate, I must have been asked 100 times where I was and what I did in those years when Hitler ruled our state. I said I was a child, or at most a teenager, but this always extended the questioning. They'd ask, where were my parents, my father, my mother, and to this I could answer not a thing. The seed planted there at Nuremberg in 1947 started to sprout and to grow. Gradually I understood what that verdict meant to me, when there are crimes that I can see and I can know. And now I also know what it is to be charged with mass guilt. Once in a lifetime is enough for me. No, I could not take it for a second time, and that is why I am here today. The events of May 25th, the day of our protest, put a small balance weight on the other side. Hopefully someday my contribution to peace will help just a bit to turn